Welcome to the deep dive.
Huh.
I'm really thrilled you're joining us today because we're gonna try and answer a massive and surprisingly complicated question.
Yeah, it really is.
Right. What exactly is political sociology? And our mission for this deep dive is to explore this brilliant paper by Andrew G. Walder from the Annual Review of Sociology. And we're going to map out how this academic field basically completely lost its way and how it's finally finding its way back.
Which is a fascinating journey.
It really is, because at its core, political sociology is supposed to be the study of the relationship between social structure and political behavior.
Right.
Basically, it connects the dots between who you are in society and how you act in the political arena. But to understand why this is such a gripping topic, think about how we normally look at a major political movement today, like a massive protest or a revolution or a new political party. We tend to treat it like a sporting event.
Yeah, we really do.
We look at the crowd size, the tactics, how much funding they raise, how cleverly they use social media. It's all about the mechanics of the game.
Well, and that's because it's highly visible. And more importantly, it's measurable.
Right.
As observers, we just gravitate toward things we can count and categorize. A million people in a square is a data point you can actually point to and analyze.
Exactly. But then you take a step back and ask a deceptively simple question. Like, why do these specific people believe these specific things?
Right.
What is the root cause of their political orientation? And suddenly, that clear scoreboard completely disappears. We step into a landscape that is just incredibly murky.
Oh, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
If we want to figure out why, we can't just look at a group's modern tactics or their fundraising emails. We have to look at the deep underlying social structures of the people involved. And for anyone listening who's trying to understand the world today, this distinction matters immensely. If we only ever look at how a protest or a movement organizes, we completely miss the root causes. We miss why groups become radical or reformist or peaceful or violent in the first place.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because the central drama of this source text is wild. Walder argues that an entire academic discipline essentially suffered a massive bout of amnesia.
Yeah, they really did.
They forgot their original purpose, which was explaining that why, and became entirely obsessed with the how. Like, they essentially traded in the mystery of human motivation for the logistics of mobilization.
It remains just a remarkable plot twist in the history of the social sciences.
Right.
To fully grasp how the field lost its way, we have to travel back to what it used to be.
Yeah.
The golden age of the why, which runs from the origins of the field right up until the 1970s.
During this era, political sociologists were acting a bit like true crime profilers.
Oh, I like that comparison.
Right. They weren't just looking at the footprint left at the scene. They were trying to deduce the deep underlying motive of a movement based on the social background of the people in it.
Right.
And they had a few different lenses for doing this, starting with money and class.
Yeah, that was the foundational approach. Class analysis, which had its roots in Marxist thought, looked primarily at economic modes of production.
Okay.
The theory posited that the structural realities of the economy, meaning, who owns the factories and the land, versus who actually performs the labor, that inherently produces class conflicts.
I see.
And that those economic conflicts basically dictate a movement's political orientation.
But eventually they realized that money doesn't explain everything, right? So a different group of researchers started looking at psychology.
Yes.
Specifically, a concept called relative deprivation or role theory.
Right. This approach shifts the focus away from absolute poverty. It suggests that political unrest is driven by psychological frustration. So imagine your group's social status is suddenly declining, while another group's status is rising.
Oh, man. Yeah, that would breed some resentment.
Exactly. That status inconsistency breeds deep, deep resentment. The psychological strain makes people prime recruits for extreme movements, regardless of whether they are completely broke or just feeling left behind.
And then there was a third angle rooted in the work of sociologists like Talcott Parsons and Emil Durkheim. And this one zoomed out even further to look at society's overall moral order.
Right.
The argument here is that when a society goes through rapid, intense change, like a sudden industrialization or a huge economic boom, the traditional moral order just gets shattered.
Right. Everything is upended.
Yeah, people feel socially untethered, which pushes them toward radical secular or religious movements, just to restore some sense of order and meaning to their lives.
Exactly.
So keeping with that profiler analogy, early sociologists were checking your economic class, your psychological status, and your community stability to predict what kind of political movement you'd join. And to really ground this, I want to bring up a specific, fascinating historical example from the text.
Oh, Lipset.
Yeah. Seymour Martin Lipset's 1950 study called Agrarian Socialism, he went to the Canadian wheat belt in the mid-20th century, which honestly does not sound like the vanguard of a socialist uprising.
Yeah, you would really expect a radical anti-capitalist movement to emerge in some grimy industrial city, not among rural farmers in North America.
Right.
But Lipset wanted to explain this anomaly. He mapped the social structure of these farmers. He looked at the commercialized nature of smallholding agriculture.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following this. When we say commercialized nature of smallholding agriculture, we basically mean these were independent farmers who owned small plots of land, but their survival depended entirely on massive, volatile global markets.
That is the crucial mechanism right there.
Okay.
These farmers owned their land, but they did not own the railroads that transported their wheat or the grain elevators that stored it. So they were entirely at the mercy of powerful middlemen and completely volatile grain prices. They were structurally vulnerable.
Wow.
And that acute vulnerability bred this intense conflict between the farmers and the urban monopolies, which in turn forged a highly cooperative, anti-capitalist political movement.
And what's really cool is Lipset also explained why this radical movement suddenly moderated its views once it actually won regional power in Canada.
Yeah.
It wasn't because they sold out. It was a direct result of their structural interests.
Exactly.
Once they were in government, their main goal was stabilizing grain prices and securing their farms, not, launching a global Marxist revolution. Their structural needs dictated their political behavior.
And we should pause here just to clarify an essential point about political sociology as an academic pursuit.
Oh, absolutely.
Whether researchers were utilizing Marxist class theory to examine left-wing uprisings, or as Lipset did in later essays examining right-wing extremism and working-class authoritarianism, the field was engaged in an impartial scientific endeavor.
Yeah, we are definitely not endorsing any of these ideologies here, and neither were they.
Right. Their goal was strictly analytical. They were attempting to trace a group's political orientation backward, linking their public actions to the lived structural experiences of the people involved.
It sounds so elegant on paper. Like, map the social structure, you calculate the economic strain, and boom, you predict the political behavior.
If only it were that simple.
Right. Because the text points out that these grand theories hit a massive brick wall. They kept failing to predict actual historical events. Which brings us to the rupture that changed the discipline forever.
Yes. The breaking point arrived in 1964, documented in a groundbreaking study by a sociologist named Charles Tilly.
Okay.
He decided to investigate the Vendée counter-revolution, which was this massive uprising that occurred in Western France in the 1790s, shortly after the French Revolution.
So Tilly goes into the historical archives to test the two dominant theories of the time, Marxist class analysis and modernization theory. According to the Marxist framework, this counter-revolution against the new French Republic should have been a clear class war. It should have been driven by the old pre-capitalist classes, the nobility and the peasants fighting against the capitalist bourgeoisie. And just to clarify that term, the bourgeoisie were essentially the newly wealthy urban business owners and merchants who were seizing power from the old aristocrats.
Exactly. And modernization theory offered a totally different prediction.
Right.
It posited that the rebellion would center in the specific towns that had been most severely disrupted by this new capitalist expansion. The trauma of rapid economic change should have triggered the revolt.
But wait, here's where it gets really interesting. If Marxist theory was the absolute gold standard in academia back then, how did the field react when Tilly dug into the archives and found that neither theory worked?
Oh, it sent shockwaves through the discipline. Tilly's data contradicted everything. The counter-revolution did not erupt in the most capitalist regions, nor the least. The social classes did not line up neatly on opposite sides of the battlefield at all.
That is wild.
The urban bourgeoisie and the peasants were entirely divided among themselves. You had peasants fighting for the revolution and peasants fighting fiercely against it. The deep, slow-moving economic structures utterly failed to explain who fought whom.
So Tilly had to search for the real trigger. If it wasn't a slow-moving economic conflict, what actually caused the split?
Right.
And it turned out to be a single sudden piece of legislation.
Yes, the new revolutionary government in Paris demanded that all Catholic clergy take a loyalty oath to the state, which explicitly required them to repudiate the ultimate authority of the Pope.
Man, that is a brutal forced choice.
It really was. It was a political wedge that split the local priests right down the middle. Those who refused the oath were immediately driven into opposition by the state.
Oh, wow.
And when those priests became outlaws, they took their deeply loyal parishioners with them into the counter-revolution.
So it vertically fractured the entire community. It didn't matter if you were a poor peasant or a wealthy merchant. If your local priest refused the oath, you were suddenly part of the counter-revolution.
Exactly. Your political orientation was entirely dependent on a local, immediate political crisis.
This raises an important question, then.
Yes. Tilly realized that the political orientation of these groups was forged in the crucible of short-term mobilization. It was driven by organizations' forced choices and immediate political events, not centuries-old economic structures.
So because of findings like Tilly's, the entire field of political sociology went through this radical paradigm shift in the 1970s.
Right.
The field essentially threw its hands up and said predicting why people believe things is impossible. Our grand theories are consistently wrong.
Pretty much.
From now on, let's just study how any group manages to mobilize at all.
And this pivot was heavily influenced by a massive challenge from outside sociology. Economists started looking at social movements, specifically Mancur Olson and his concept of the free rider problem.
I have to admit, I find the free rider problem to be simultaneously the most cynical and the most logical concept in this entire paper.
Well, Olson argued that it is fundamentally irrational for an individual to participate in a social movement if they can reap the benefits without doing any of the dangerous work.
Right.
Consider a labor union striking for a higher wage. If the strike succeeds, everyone gets the higher wage. Even the workers who stayed home avoided the freezing picket line and didn't risk getting fired.
So basic economic logic dictates that everyone should just free ride on the efforts of others.
Exactly. The real mystery, Olson argued, wasn't why people were mad, but why anyone would ever bother to protest at all.
Wait, I feel like everyone listening has experienced this. This sounds exactly like the classic group project dilemma from high school, where one kid does all the work and the other three still get an A.
Yep.
Are you telling me economists applied that to global revolutions?
That is the exact underlying logic.
Yeah.
And it completely hijacked political sociology.
I really struggle with that. I mean, if we reduce massive social movements, civil rights struggles, anti-war protests, revolutions to just a free rider problem, doesn't that reduce human passion to a spreadsheet?
It does.
It feels like we're completely ignoring the outrage, the deeply held beliefs, the actual ideology that drives people to risk their lives.
Your frustration is entirely justified, and it mirrors the critique that eventually reshaped the field later on.
Yeah.
But for several decades, resource mobilization and political process theories totally dominated the landscape. Sociologists felt immense pressure to answer the economists, so they abandoned the why and focused relentlessly on organizational capacity.
Wow.
They studied strategy fundraising and what they call political opportunity structures.
Okay, let's break down political opportunity structures.
So it refers to the external environment a movement operates within. Are the local police likely to crack down violently? Is the media landscape sympathetic?
Okay.
Are the politicians currently in power vulnerable to a primary challenge?
Right.
The entire focus of the discipline became, how does a group navigate this specific environment to get organized and overcome the free rider problem?
And the actual political orientation of the movement, whether they were fighting for communism, fascism, environmentalism, or prohibition, was completely sidelined.
Completely.
It was treated as a given, like just a precondition.
Yes.
The attitude was, okay, these people are angry about something, that's just the raw material. Now let's analyze their fundraising strategy and their organizational chart.
Exactly. The content of the movement was placed into a black box that researchers simply chose not to open.
But you can't ignore the content of a movement forever. The source text points out that while the mainstream sociological field was obsessing over how researchers in adjacent fields like labor history or ethnic studies, they kept investigating the why.
Thank goodness they did.
Right. And when they started looking at social structures again, they uncovered incredible mechanisms.
Eventually, you confront scenarios where two groups have similar resources. They exist in similar environments, and yet they choose vastly different political paths. You have to ask why.
Yeah, I was reading the section on Howard Kimmeldorf's 1989 study of U.S. longshoremen, and it completely blew my mind.
Oh, that's a classic study.
He looked at the dock workers' unions on the West Coast, primarily in San Francisco, and compared them to the union on the East Coast in New York.
Right.
You have two groups of men doing the exact same grueling, highly dangerous job loading and unloading cargo. But on the West Coast, the union was heavily dominated by communists and left-wing radicals. Yet in New York, the union doing the exact same work was essentially run by organized crime and conservative labor rackets. How does that happen?
Well, Gimmelsdorf solved this mystery by marrying the why and the how. He moved past abstract class theories and looked at the concrete, lived social structures of the two coasts.
Okay.
The shipping industry operated differently in the two cities, but more importantly, the origins of the labor force were distinct.
Right. The San Francisco dock workers often had backgrounds in radical Western logging and mining camps.
Yes.
They brought that intense, militant cooperative culture with them to the docks. Whereas the New York dock workers were largely composed of recent immigrants who were highly dependent on local, neighborhood-based political bosses and ethnic networks just to survive.
Furthermore, Gimmelsdorf analyzed the political opportunity structures of San Francisco versus New York at the exact historical moment those unions were cementing their power.
Wow, so it all comes together.
Exactly. It was a specific combination of their unique social backgrounds intersecting with the political environment of their respective cities that forged their vastly different political identities.
We see a similar revelation in Roger Gould's work on the Paris Commune of 1871.
Oh, yeah.
For over a century, historians and sociologists categorized the Commune as a classic working-class uprising. The grand theories dictated it was driven by proletarian class identity, the idea that these people fought the government primarily because they were factory workers united against factory owners.
But Gould actually mapped out the specific social networks of the insurgents. He meticulously tracked who was fighting on the barricades alongside whom.
And what did he find?
He discovered that the mobilization was not based on their occupations. They weren't fighting because their coworkers were fighting. They were fighting because their neighbors were fighting.
The mobilization was based on neighborhood networks. It was community solidarity.
Yes.
The social structure that defined their political orientation was geography and local ties, not their relationship to the means of production.
Which brings us to how we pull the why back into the spotlight today.
Right.
The text offers a few paths forward, emphasizing how movements adapt to survive. The first concept is viewing political orientation as a byproduct.
This is a sobering idea. It suggests that a movement doesn't always freely sit down and choose its ideology from a menu. Sometimes the environment literally forces a movement to take a certain shape.
The text highlights Paul Almeida's research on El Salvador to illustrate this.
Oh.
He studied decades of protest and demonstrated that when a state utilizes violent state-sponsored repression against peaceful democratic movements, it rarely just crushes them. Instead, it transforms them. The severe repression literally pushes moderate groups into becoming violent revolutionary resistance organizations.
It's almost like natural selection, but for protests.
That's a great way to put it.
If the environment is a ruthless dictatorship, the open democratic debate club-style movements just get wiped out.
Right.
If you try to protest peacefully and are met with lethal force, the only organizations that can survive that evolutionary pressure are the highly secretive, strictly disciplined, and radicalized movements that are willing to use lethal force back.
And this connects directly to the subjective side of how movements operate the way they communicate,
Where?
which sociologists call framing.
Okay.
Movements intentionally frame their messages to resonate with potential recruits.
Like an advertising slogan, but for a political revolution.
Exactly. But the text asks a brilliant, necessary question. Who responds to what frames? You can engineer the most persuasive rhetorical frame imaginable, but if it does not align with the lived structural realities of your audience, it will completely fail.
And to prove this, Walter brings up William Brustein's research on interwar Europe, specifically examining the rise of fascism.
And keeping our strictly analytical, impartial lens here, we have to look at the mechanics of this historical shift.
Of course.
During the 1920s and 30s, there was a well-documented shift where working-class voters abandoned traditional left-wing and socialist parties and migrated over to fascist parties.
The easy assumption is that they were just hypnotized by charismatic leaders or swept up in abstract nationalism.
Right.
But Brustein found that the mechanism was much more calculated.
He investigated how fascist platforms intentionally incorporated appeals to very specific working-class economic interests.
Wow.
They didn't just yell about national glory. The fascist parties targeted small shopkeepers by explicitly promising to crush the large department stores that were threatening their livelihoods.
Oh, I see.
They targeted struggling farmers by promising aggressive agricultural price supports and debt relief. They co-opted socialist economic talking points, but framed them through a lens of extreme nationalism.
So they identified the exact structural vulnerabilities, the specific economic terrors of those workers at that specific time.
Exactly.
It proves that you cannot separate the message from the audience. You cannot understand a movement's ideology without deeply understanding the economic and structural anxieties of the people listening to it.
Right.
If a frame works, it is because it is hitting a very real structural nerve.
This clearly demonstrates why the purely organizational focus of the last few decades is just insufficient. Yes, it is vital to know how groups marshal resources, utilize media, and overcome the free rider problem. But if we do not know what structural nerves they are hitting, we do not actually understand the movement at all.
So we have gone on quite a journey today. We started with the grand sweeping theories of why people protest, like class conflict and psychological frustration.
Yeah.
Then we took a decades-long detour into the logistics of how they organize resource mobilization, free riders, opportunity structures. And now the field of political sociology is finally realizing that to truly understand contentious politics, we have to marry the two.
We must consistently ask, under what specific social conditions does a particular ideology become the most rational or the most emotionally resonant choice for a specific group of people?
So what does this all mean for our listener? Because we live in an era of absolute information overload.
We really do.
We are surrounded by constant political movements, protests, and outrage cycles. The takeaway here is to fundamentally change how you consume the news.
Yes.
Don't just look at a group's tactics. Don't just look at how many retweets a hashtag gets or how well a protest is organized.
Look deeper into the structural realities.
Right.
Ask yourself, what are the underlying social structures, the community networks, and the economic anxieties that made this specific ideology resonate with these specific people at this exact moment?
It changes the whole game. Instead of just asking, how did this group get so big, you start asking, why were these people so ready to hear this message?
It requires more critical thinking than simply counting crowd sizes, but it yields a vastly more accurate picture of our political world.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. It builds on a brief point from the text that I found incredibly provocative.
Oh yeah, what was that?
The paper notes that social movement organizations heavily impact the life courses of their members. And sometimes organizations that are explicitly designed to liberate people end up creating new, highly intensive forms of internal oppression and conformity.
Right, the group itself becomes a totalizing force in the member's life.
Exactly. So here is the question to take with you. If joining a movement completely transforms your identity, dictates your friend group, and polices your beliefs after you join, are you actually choosing your political orientation?
Right.
Or is the organization you join doing the choosing for you?
That is a phenomenal question to end on. It highlights the complex interplay between the individual and the structure perfectly.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the why, and we will catch you next time.